Today, we are diving into a really wild case. It's a story about how the legal system itself, all its rules and deadlines, was allegedly turned into a weapon. We're going to see how lawyers can use the process of the law not to find the truth, but to try and financially crush an opponent, no matter who's actually right or wrong. So let's just start with the central mystery here, the question that sparked this whole thing. How is it possible to lose a court case based on a law that doesn't even exist anymore? It sounds completely impossible, right? But it happened. And the story of how it happened reveals this really disturbing strategy where the process becomes the punishment. All right, so let's set the scene. The date is November 25th, 2025. A property owner who's been fighting a local county over their rental rights gets hit with a devastating loss. A judge issues what's called a permanent injunction, and that's a court order that, for all intents and purposes, put them completely out of business. But here's the absolutely crazy part. The entire legal argument that the judge based his decision on, it had been thrown out by a higher court 22 days before he even signed the order. The law he used was null and void. The property owner was basically shut down by a legal ghost. So you have to be asking, how on earth could a court get something so fundamentally wrong? Well, to understand that, we need to rewind a little bit and look at the legal fight that was raging before this impossible ruling came down. And believe it or not, it all came down to how you interpret a single word. So here was the showdown. On one side, you had the county. Their old code mentioned rentals on a weekly basis. From that one word, they built this whole argument they called their never legal doctrine, saying any rental shorter than a week had always been illegal. But the property owners fired back, saying, hold on, the code never actually banned shorter rentals. They were leaning on a really fundamental legal idea. If a law that restricts your property rights is vague, it has to be interpreted in your favor. And that idea has a name, strict construction. It's a super important safeguard for regular citizens. It basically means the government can't use fuzzy, unclear language to strip away your property rights. If a zoning law isn't crystal clear, the tie automatically goes to the property owner. And this principle? It was about to become the silver bullet in this entire fight. And bam! On November 3rd, 2025, that silver bullet hit its mark. A state appeals court in a huge landmark case sided with the property owners. They applied strict construction, and in doing so, they just completely demolished the county's never legal argument. The law of the land had officially, definitively changed. Okay, this little chart helps put it all in perspective. You had an old federal case that upheld the ban. That's the old law. Then, on November 3rd, the state appeals court came in and created the new law, which reversed the ban. But then, 22 days later, the local court in our story just plowed ahead, completely ignoring that new law and dropping its impossible ruling based on the old, outdated one. And this brings us to the real head-scratcher, that 22-day gap between the law changing and the judge making the wrong call. Now think about it. The county's lawyers, they knew the law had changed. They were the ones who lost the appeal. So the big question is, why wasn't the judge told? This is where a massive, fundamental rule of legal ethics comes into play. It's called the duty of candor. What this means is that lawyers aren't just paid fighters for their clients. They are officers of the court, and they have an absolute, non-negotiable duty to inform a judge about controlling legal authority, even if that authority completely blows up their own case. You simply cannot stand by and let a judge rule in your favor based on a law you know for a fact has been overturned. And this timeline just lays out the chilling silence. November 3rd, the law changes. Then, 11 days after their entire legal argument was officially dead and buried, the county's lawyers send a proposed order to the judge, actively pushing him to rule in their favor based on that dead law. And on November 25th, the judge, completely in the dark, signs it. So if keeping silent was the first part of the strategy, the way the county's lawyers eventually revealed the truth, well, you could argue it was even more shocking. It wasn't a letter to the judge saying, hey, we made a mistake. Oh no. It was something way, way sneakier. The truth finally limped out into the light 67 days after the law had changed. But it wasn't in some filing to correct the massive error. No, it was buried deep inside a motion to punish the property owner by demanding that they pay the county's legal fees. And the amount they demanded was just breathtaking, $110,000. And get this, their reason was that the property owner's defense was, quote, frivolous.
Just think about the nerve. They asked a judge to punish the owner for making the exact same legal argument that the state's second highest court had just said was correct. The audacity is it's remarkable. And here it is. This is the smoking gun. Buried on page 3, tucked away in the third footnote of that massive fee motion, was a simple citation. It was a reference to the very case that proved their entire position was wrong. The property owner's side called this disclosure by subterfuge, a clever way to technically follow the rule while making sure the judge would almost certainly miss its case-destroying importance.
But the story is not over. Just when you think it can't get any wilder, there's a huge twist. As the property owner was fighting this impossible ruling, a mistake by their own lawyer nearly cost them everything and kicked off this frantic, desperate race against the clock.
So to officially appeal the judge's bad ruling, they had to pay the court clerk a little under $5,000. This was to get the case file prepared for the higher court. It's a totally standard procedure, but it has a very strict you can't miss it deadline. For whatever reason, the owner's lawyer delayed paying that bill. He mistakenly thought some other court filings might change the final amount. What he didn't seem to realize is that the appeal clock, well, it waits for no one.
The property owners started getting really nervous, pushing their lawyer for answers, only to discover, to their horror, that the bill hadn't been paid for weeks. They found this out on day 29 of a 30-day payment window. They had one single day left to save their entire case from being thrown out on a technicality.
So with literally no time to spare, the owner took matters into their own hands. They raced down to the courthouse, went around their lawyer, and paid the bill themselves. With just one day left on the clock, they single-handedly saved their appeal from total disaster. Okay, so let's zoom out. What does this whole string of events, a ruling on a dead law, a disclosure hidden in a footnote, a near-fatal paperwork error, what does it all tell us about our legal system? It really introduces a very troubling concept. It's called procedural weaponization. And it's when the legal process itself becomes the punishment. The fight stops being about who's right and who's wrong, and it becomes about using delays, deadlines, and just the insane cost of fighting in court to bleed your opponent dry, hoping they'll just give up because they can't afford to go on. So what are the big takeaways here? First, ethical rules like the duty of candor aren't just suggestions. They are the load-bearing walls of our entire justice system. Second, silence can absolutely be a weapon. What isn't said can be just as damaging as an outright lie. Third, the process itself can be twisted and used against you even when you have the law on your side. And finally, as that last-minute courthouse dash showed us, justice requires everyone to be vigilant, and that includes the clients themselves. And all this leaves us with one last, really crucial question. We pay lawyers to be aggressive, to fight for us, but in that pursuit of victory, where is the line? When does a smart, aggressive legal strategy cross over into something much darker, a fraud on the court itself? There's no easy answer, but it's a question we have to keep asking if we want a justice system that we can actually trust.